All right, so welcome to another episode of the podcast. And I believe where we left off with Brother Long, who's joining us again, we were actually discussing how to take the OKRs, link them to the Scrum teams to make this more operational, right? And we talked about how you take the goals and you break those down to smaller and smaller pieces using the analysis technique of decomposition, and that's what gets into the sprint goal, into the sprint. And now I want to discuss another aspect of this. I want to discuss breaking down the work itself. And when I say breaking down the work itself, again, we're always doing this kind of gap analysis of looking at what do we want to produce, what's our future desired results that we want, and what do we have right now. And there's always doing that gap analysis to see, well, whatever that gap is, what are we going to create? What will fit into our time box that we can actually create to produce in this time box? What can we actually do? And when we talked last time about when we produce something that's really big, we call it an epic, right? An epic is something that is really big. It's a piece of work to fill that gap. We're going to give it to a stakeholder, but it's really big, and it usually can't be done within a single sprint. And so the trick that comes in to making sure that you can break that big piece of work down into smaller pieces. And when I break it down into smaller pieces, the next side of this is being able to track to make sure that we're on pace with doing whatever we need to do with stakeholders, right? So we do a lot of this for tracking purposes. So let me show you how this works out. I got this big thing. Hopefully you can see my screen. So I'll have this big thing we call an epic, right? And again, before we're using our example of making 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but let's say that the epic, we're having a huge banquet, and there's going to be 100 people there. So in our epic, we need 200 P&J sandwiches. Right? And our sprint, we can't do 200. 200 is too big. So what we're going to do is break it down into something that is smaller, more manageable. Now, what some people do, they think about the best way to construct it, and they'll say, well, you know what? Maybe what I can do is acquire all the bread, right? If I want to make 200 sandwiches, then I need 400 slices of bread. And so they'll want to actually produce 400 slices of bread in the first sprint. And that's the wrong way to break down the work, to decompose it. You understand? You know what's wrong with it? Why we don't want to do that?
Because the bread might be old by the time we start making the sandwiches.
That is a risk, but that's not the main reason why we do this. See what I want to do is I want to produce something that is potentially shippable. And the reason I want something potentially shippable is so that at the end of the period, I can actually test this out, put it in front of a customer to get feedback. Now, if I'm making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if I just gave them bread, I can't get much feedback, or at least decent feedback, from customers on how good the peanut butter and jelly sandwich was. So instead of actually slicing it by components, I would rather have a small piece, trying to get 200. Hey, produce 10. And then they could sample one of the 10, eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then I get real feedback on how good the peanut butter and jelly sandwich was. Additionally, I'll know exactly how long it takes to make 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because I've done it. Right. And now I can use that information to forecast what we're going to do in the future. How you feeling
And
about it?
well, if we did 200, if we did 400 pieces of bread, that would not give us an increment at the end of the sprint
That's right.
to be able to get the feedback on.
Exactly. And again, the most important thing is the feedback. If we don't get the feedback, then we really don't know that we've done it successfully. Right? We don't know that we've done it with quality. So again, if this is my sprint that I have here, what I'm going to do is figure out, well, how much of the total stuff that I'm actually trying to create will fit inside the sprint. And in our case, we may estimate that, you know what? Our sprint is only big enough to do 10 and J sandwiches. So we sign up for 10. And that's how we break it down. How are you feeling about this?
I understand it.
Now, here's the deal. If I can do 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches per sprint, and my goal is 200 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, then what I'm going to have is what I call a feature. So epics, sometimes they break down to what we call features. Right? So a feature is it's a piece of that epic. But what I try to do is I try to make my feature the size of something that I can actually accomplish in a month. So our epic corresponds to our key result, and the duration that we had to do that was 3 months. Right? So I'm gonna write this on the screen, 3 months. That's how big it was. My feature is 1 month.
I'm sorry, Brian. I had a internet interruption. The last thing I heard you say was that the feature is something that can be accomplished in a month.
Correct. And I was saying that, that my epic corresponds to a key result, which is something that we can accomplish in 3 months, a quarter. And I'm going to break that down into what can be accomplished in a month. So if I got this epic, and I said that for the epic, it was 200 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. If I'm going to break this down to what can I accomplish in a month, it's roughly 67 P&J sandwiches. I basically just took the number from the epic and divided by 3. It makes sense so far?
Can you say that again? I had another internet issue.
Oh, no worries. When I basically what I said is the feature, I made that 67 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And what I did was I just took the epic and divided by 3. Right? Because again, epic was 3 months long, feature is 1 month long. Divide by 3. There you have it. Pretty simple, right?
Yes.
Now, let's pretend that our sprint is 2 weeks long. Right? So if our sprint is 2 weeks long, by definition, a user story is something that can fit inside of a sprint. right? And again, we said our sprint is 2 weeks long, so the maximum duration for a user story is 2 weeks. This makes sense so far?
Yes, we're decomposing.
Yep, using decomposition, just bringing it down to smaller and smaller pieces, right? And so based on that, if I take this 67 and divide by 2, basically the biggest I can make a user story for making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that would fit inside of a sprint would be 34, roughly. And let me just show you why this is so important, why we're doing this thing. I break things down for tracking purposes. What we talked about in the last episode is that the greater the risk that your team could not deliver, the more frequently you should check to make sure you're on track. And so what I want to do, if I'm going to make sure that we reach this 200 number and meet our key result, what I'm going to do is break things down. And I don't want to wait 3 months before I check to make sure that we're on track. What I want to do is at the end of 2 weeks, I want to make sure that I check. And at the end of the 2 weeks, hopefully, at the end of that sprint, we've actually produced a good 34 sandwiches. And if I keep this pattern up, right? And let's draw this up. If a sprint is 2 weeks, and here's sprint 1, here's sprint 2. Right? And again, these two together make 1 month, right? Because each sprint is 2 weeks long. Here I got sprint 3. I got sprint 4. That's the second month. And then here I've got sprint 5 and sprint 6. That's the third month. And if I set things up this way, break things down, it helps me to track. It helps me to check to make sure we're on track to make progress. At the end of sprint 1, if I have this timeline, right? At the end of sprint 1, what I should see is 34 sandwiches to let me know I'm on track. At the end of sprint 2, I got 2 34s done with this thing. So what I should see cumulatively 78 sandwiches. And again, this is something I can actually track and look and see, do I have 78 sandwiches or not? If I do, then we're on track, everything's good. If not, I got to take some corrective action. At the end of sprint 3, I should see 112. The end of sprint 4, I should see 146. Then in sprint 5, I should see around, 180 or so. And then I should have my whole 200 at the end of sprint 6. By breaking things down, by decomposing it, I get control over what's going on because I can track the work now. I can see if we're meeting the minimum number to actually make sure that we end up with the results that we want. And of course, I did some bad math, so don't hold that against me, crew. But hopefully everybody gets the idea. How are you feeling about this? Does this make sense?
Yeah, so I saw a video today, and I guess the next decomposition or somewhere after that would be a task. And they suggested that the task be no longer than 3 days, anywhere between 30 minutes to 3 days.
Yeah, the task is next level, and I would go a step farther. And I would say that you want your task to be no bigger than 2 days. I usually try to make mine 1 day long. Because if you make them all 1 day long, remember you have your stand up every day. So I know when there's an impediment because one of the tasks that was supposed to get done just didn't get done. And then I can just count. If each task is a day, then now you're just counting things, which is really easy. I can use my fingers and toes for that, right? I don't have to do any weird calculations for anything. And in this way, I can make sure that everything is on track all along the way.
Okay, so we decomposing from the quarter all the way down to the day, and we're using our daily scrum to make sure we're meeting our daily tasks. And as long as we do our daily tasks, we'll be successful in our sprint, successful in our feature, and then successful in our epic.
Correct.
I love it.
And again, this is how you stay on top of everything, right? And that what you really want is the scrum master should be making sure that they track to see, hey, are we completing stuff every day? And if not, let's raise a flag. The product owner should be making sure that we're completing the right stuff. Now, if you're completing stuff, you're completing the tasks, but they don't relate to the things that are at the top of the backlog, doesn't do you any good. So Scrum Master makes sure you actually do it. Product owner makes sure you do the right thing. It's efficiency versus effectiveness. And then this goes all the way up the chain, right? Because if I'm on track on a daily basis, then I'll be on track with the user stories in the sprint, and I'll be on track with the feature, which means I'm on track with my key result, my epic. Because everything cascades, right? And again, as soon as I figure out I'm late, if I'm 1 day late with a particular task, then what that means is that I'm probably going to be 1 day late with the feature. So I'll be 1 day late with the epic, with the key result. And so now I need to figure out how I can make up that 1 day. What can I change to make things more efficient to make up that time? And if I can make up that time, great. If I can't figure out how to make up that time, then I need to actually let my stakeholders know that they're not going to receive what they were promised to receive on the date that we promised. It'll be late. And this is how I manage everything. What do you think about this?
Well, it's making me think about this big video game company. The biggest video game in the world right now is that's got hundreds of thousands of players every day. It's called Ark. It's a dinosaur game, and they keep promising the community they're going to deliver certain things, and they're just notorious for never getting it out when they say. Yeah. And so I'm thinking to myself, I bet you they are not using this process. because if they were, they would not have. It's been 7 years now, and for 7 years they never deliver when they say they will.
It was a huge problem, right?
Yeah.
the the thing I'm going to point out, there's one tool that we use to track this stuff to make it easier, and that's called a burn down chart. And the burn down chart, what we do, if the total number of story points we have for the sprint is 34, we mark it here. And then each day of the sprint, so if we had 2 weeks, that's 10 days. Right? So what we'll do is we'll count out how many story points are remaining, and we plot it out. So let's say on day 1, we didn't finish anything on day 1, so we still had 34 story points. On day 2, we didn't finish anything, so we still had 34 story points. But on day 3, we finish a 5-point story, right? So now there are only 29 story points left. So this is 17. Let's say there were 25 story points left, 29 story points left. So we're like up here. And say the next day we did another 5-point story, right? And so now there are only 24 story points left. And what I can do is connect these dots on how many story points are remaining and start you start forming a line. And what I can do on a daily basis is start forecasting. Well, here's my trajectory. Like, here's the slope of the line. So if I keep at the pace I'm going right now, I'll finish early, which is good. But again, this burn down chart allows me to forecast, to predict when we're going to finish. And if the slope of the line had been different, where it was beyond the 10 days, then, hey, I got a problem. I'm not going to finish on time. And that's when we need to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to change to reel in that date. And again, this is some of the analysis that the Scrum Master should do on a daily basis. Usually, if you just do this analysis and reflect back to the team, here's what's happening. The team will actually can discuss solutions to it. But if you don't do the analysis and reflect back to the team, hey, our trajectory is going to put us where we're going to be 4 days late. What do we do about it? They wouldn't even think to brainstorm a solution for it. So this is the importance of having that Scrum Master to give the team the feedback. What do you think about this?
I'm just so curious. I want a Rolodex of the tools, man. I want a Rolodex of the tools because you just be pulling them out. I want to know how many they are.
There's as many hairs as you have on your head as many tools I can pull out, right? Wow. And I pulled out a many. That's why I'm bald now. I pulled out a lot. But yeah, there's a bunch of tools. This is one of the primary tools, the burn down chart. And we'll go over some different ones at some later dates. This work?
Yes.
All right. So what I'm going to do is just recap real quick. What we talked about today was, again, following up on how we take the key result, which was a piece of our objective, and how to make that actionable and make sure our scrum teams are doing it. Usually what we'll do is we will translate that key result into what we call an epic. It's 3-month long. And then we'll break that down. We'll decompose it into a feature that's like 1 month long. We decompose that into stories that can be completed in less than 2 weeks. And we can actually break that down into tasks. I like to have tasks that can be completed every day. And that way, in stand-up, when you're discussing what we're doing, we can actually discuss, hey, did this task complete it? Yes or no? And if it didn't complete, then you know something's wrong right off the bat. We need to take some corrective action. But this is breaking things down into smaller pieces is how we can actually track progress. Often what people do incorrectly, if you leave it at the key result level, the big level, and don't decompose it, you really have no good means to judge in advance whether or not you're going to complete the key result on time or not. And by breaking it down and tracking it, now I have like an early warning system. I'll know in the beginning if I can't make it, rather than having to wait until the last day before we figure out, oh, we're not going to make it. And the primary person that makes sure this stuff happens is the Scrum Master, right? They're doing some of this analysis. They're making sure that the team is actually faced with this information so they can change their behavior if they need to. And this is all we'll actually talk about for today. I'll leave you with any last minute comments you want to have before we wrap up.
And so our key result is something we want to do in a quarter?
Correct. And
Okay.
we're doing that because remember, we had an objective to complete for the year.
Yes.
Wrote that down into quarterly key results. So if we don't finish that key result on time, we won't actually complete the objective within the year.
Okay, and so once we identify our key results, to make it actionable, we change that into an epic and then decompose from there.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is the link. This is how you implement strategy, right?
Yes.
But what companies do incorrect is that sometimes they have strategy on a PowerPoint or on the wall somewhere, and they don't do this translation into the tangible work that their workforce is actually completing on a daily basis. They don't decompose it. And what we have here is a system by which if you're constantly decomposing it, then I know that everything we're doing is related to this key result. So I'm guaranteed to be able to finish it as long as I manage the work. Make sense?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, with that, we'll close for today. Thank you for coming out again, and we'll try to do another one of these. I'll probably miss it tomorrow. But we'll try to do one of these things on next week.
Okay.
All right. Take care.